The ocean can turn from paradise to nightmare in a matter of seconds, and few moments are more terrifying than when a shark strikes without warning. In this video, you'll witness 6 harrowing encounters, from a tiger shark dragging a diver into chaos, to a hammerhead toppling a mother and child from their inflatable flamingo in the Bahamas. Witness the split-second violence of the sea's most feared predators, and the desperate fight for survival that follows. The waters off Port Elizabeth carried a reputation for danger, not just from storms that could rise without warning, but from the silent predators that ruled beneath the waves. On June 3, 2022, a discovery shocked even the most hardened locals. This grim event began with what seemed like a routine day of fishing, but ended with a revelation that unsettled everyone who heard it. The fishermen had set out early, their nets cast wide as they moved slowly through the cool waters, which shifted with the strong coastal currents. Their work was steady until one net drew tight in a way that did not feel like the usual catch of fish or tangled debris. When the massive shape finally surfaced, they realized they had trapped something far larger than they had ever encountered. A colossal great white shark that stretched an almost unbelievable 22 feet in length, its bulk thrashing with violent force against the mesh as the crew scrambled to secure it. As they worked to free the giant predator, one of the deckhands noticed something strange lodged along the shark's lower jawline, a flash of unnatural color that did not belong in the slick gray of the animal's flesh, or the white churn of the sea around it. When he leaned closer, he saw a strip of brightly colored fabric twisted together with the broken strap of a diving fin. That single detail shifted the mood on deck, for everyone knew that only days earlier 2 European snorkelers had disappeared along the same stretch of coast, their absence already under investigation by local authorities who feared the worst yet still held faint hope that they might be found alive. The shark's capture was immediately reported, and soon the vessel returned to shore under escort, its grim cargo drawing attention as news spread quickly through the community that something terrible had likely been uncovered. The carcass was secured for examination, and the necropsy carried out by marine experts revealed the full horror. When the stomach cavity was opened, it was clear that the animal had consumed more than fish, for inside lay the partially digested remains of a man and woman, the fragments of their bodies mingled with torn wetsuit fabric, pieces of gear, and the cracked shell of a waterproof camera that had somehow remained intact despite the shark's powerful jaws and corrosive digestive acids. The revelation left no doubt about the fate of the missing snorkelers, their disappearance explained in a way that silenced speculation and replaced uncertainty with grief. The condition of the remains told a story as well, with experts noting that the shark had likely struck in shallow water, taking advantage of its ability to surge upward with astonishing speed to drag both victims under before they had time to react. This strategy made escape nearly impossible once its jaws had closed around them. The great white's size only added to the terror of imagining the attack, for a predator of 22 feet could overpower divers with ease, pulling them beneath the surface in seconds and consuming them in a frenzy that left little behind. Investigators pieced together the timeline, noting that the couple had last been seen near a reef close to shore, where visibility was low and baitfish often gathered, conditions that could attract a hunting shark of unusual size. With no witnesses to the actual attack, the evidence inside the animal became the only testimony, and the presence of the fabric and gear wedged in its teeth had acted like a grim calling card that led authorities directly to the truth. Locals reacted with a mix of sorrow and unease, for although shark attacks were rare, the sheer scale and brutality of this one forced them to confront the reality that the ocean they lived beside could still conceal dangers beyond their control. Fishermen who had spent their lives on the water admitted that they had never seen a predator of such size in those waters, and even the scientists who studied sharks in the region acknowledged that the specimen was exceptional in both length and the violence it represented. The waterproof camera, though damaged beyond repair, was collected along with the other fragments as part of the official record, a haunting reminder of how quickly the ocean had turned deadly for the pair who had entered it with excitement and trust only days earlier. For their families, the confirmation brought both closure and devastation, ending the uncertainty, but leaving them with images too terrible to put into words. The community spoke quietly about how fate had led the fishermen to that exact catch, for without the accidental netting of the giant predator, The disappearance of the snorkelers might have remained a mystery, their bodies lost forever to the depths. Instead, the shark itself had carried the answer, its swollen stomach holding the evidence that explained everything, and the clue caught in its jaw ensured that the truth would not be overlooked. In the days that followed, the event lingered in conversation. A chilling tale passed among locals and carried by news outlets far beyond South Africa, for the image of a 22-foot shark containing the remains of 2 people was too stark to forget. Experts urged caution, but reminded the public that while attacks were uncommon, the ocean was never without risk, and large predators sometimes ventured closer to shore than expected, especially during seasons when prey fish were abundant. For those who lived along the coast, the memory of June 2022 stayed vivid, a reminder of how swiftly beauty and danger could merge in the sea, and how the thin strip of fabric and broken fin strap that first caught a deckhand's eye had led step by step to the discovery of a tragedy that would not soon be forgotten. The Florida Keys had always drawn divers with the promise of warm currents, clear water, and the haunting beauty of wrecks that rested beneath the surface, their corroded structures transformed into artificial reefs that teemed with life. On June 15, 2024, 2 divers, 29-year-old Hannah Reed and her companion Miguel Santos, descended into that world with confidence, prepared for the exploration of a partially sunken cargo ship that had become a popular sight for those seeking both history and adventure. They carried themselves with the practiced ease of experienced divers, their movements steady as they slipped into the water, unaware that the dive would turn into a desperate struggle for survival against one of the ocean's most formidable predators. The wreck lay on its side in shallow waters, its hull cracked and broken from years of storms and salt, its decks now twisted beams where schools of fish darted between pockets of shadow. Hannah swam close to the starboard opening, her flashlight cutting through the gloom, illuminating the scattered cargo containers that had collapsed into the sediment. At the same time, Miguel circled along the outer edge, scanning for movement as clouds of baitfish scattered in bursts around him. The wreck had a presence that stirred both awe and unease, for every shift of metal seemed to echo through the water, and every corner carried a darkness that could hide both fragile beauty and hidden danger. As they maneuvered through a gap in the broken hull, disturbed silt drifted upward in hazy clouds, shrouding their view and disorienting them as the small fish that lived in the wreck panicked, thrashing toward open water. It was this sudden agitation that drew the attention of something far larger lurking in the murky distance, a massive tiger shark, its striped flanks fading in and out of view like a phantom as it glided closer with slow but deliberate movements, its senses sharpened by the vibrations of the commotion. Hannah felt the water pressure shift before she saw it, a subtle surge that signaled the approach of bulk and power, and when she turned her light across the shadowy opening, the striped predator lunged forward with terrifying speed. Its first strike slammed against her shoulder, the force spinning her sideways into a jagged section of the hull. And as she tried to recover, the shark's jaws clamped down on her forearm, crushing through neoprene and flesh in a sudden eruption of pain. The water erupted with silt and bubbles as she thrashed, the predator's grip shaking her violently before releasing in a spray of blood that clouded the space around her. Miguel reacted instantly, his dive knife flashing as he struck at the great head that loomed in front of him, desperate to drive the animal back. And though his blow scraped along the shark's tough hide, the predator swung in a wide arc and snapped onto his leg with brutal force. The bite drove him downward against the debris-strewn floor, the jagged metal slicing his side as the animal wrenched him once before letting go, circling in a haze of blood that spread quickly in the confined wreck. The setting made escape nearly impossible, for every movement stirred more silt, and each broken beam threatened to trap their tanks or snag their fins as they fought to orient themselves. Hannah, clutching her torn arm against her chest, kicked frantically toward a slanted deck that jutted close to the surface, her vision blurring as pain and shock flooded her senses. Miguel struggled behind her, his leg trailing ribbons of blood as he pushed upward with desperate strokes, the water around him alive with the menace of a predator that had not yet finished. The tiger shark's movements were deliberate, circling and lunging, testing its wounded prey as it returned again and again with sweeping arcs through the confined space, its wide head brushing against the rusted beams as its eyes tracked the struggling divers. Each time it passed, the wreck reverberated with the impact of its massive body, and Hannah could feel the vibrations run through her, as if the ship itself were shuddering under the weight of the predator's attack. They reached the partially submerged deck, only to find the surface still several feet above them, a barrier of collapsing metal blocking a direct ascent, forcing them to claw their way upward through twisted beams and clouded water. Their tanks clanged against steel as they kicked, their bodies scraping along rusted edges that tore at their wetsuits and skin. And all the while the shark circled beneath, the flick of its tail stirring whirlpools that rocked the wreck and pulled them off balance. Minutes passed like hours as the attack continued, each second filled with the certainty that the predator would surge upward again to finish what it had started. And both divers found themselves consumed by raw survival instinct, their limbs moving with frantic urgency even as their bodies weakened from blood loss. When the shark at last veered away, slipping back into the darker water beyond the wreck, it was not out of mercy. Still a momentary decision, perhaps drawn by the overwhelming cloud of blood that had spread too widely to focus on a single target. Seizing that chance, Hannah and Miguel broke through the final gap, emerging into open water above the tilted deck, and with labored strokes they pushed upward until their heads broke the surface. Gasping against the air, clinging to the corroded edge of the wreck, they collapsed together, blood streaming from their wounds as the swell of the sea carried them against the jagged steel. Their dive gear hung in tatters, their bodies bruised, gashed, and drained. Yet they were alive, holding to each other with the desperate strength of those who had escaped a force far beyond their control. The ocean around them seemed endless, the wreck beneath concealing the predator that might still return at any moment. And the realization that safety lay only in endurance settled heavily on them as they pressed themselves against the corroded edge and waited for help. The water carried the faint shimmer of their blood in spreading plumes, a silent marker of the struggle that had unfolded below, and every passing current felt like the whisper of the shark's return. For Hannah and Miguel, the attack left scars deeper than the wounds that marked their bodies. For the sea they had trusted as a place of wonder and exploration had revealed itself as a realm where survival was not guaranteed, and where even experience could not protect against the sudden violence of a predator's strike. Their emergence from the water that day, battered and clinging to the wreckage, stood as a reminder of how fragile the line was between awe and terror, and how quickly the ocean could turn from sanctuary to battlefield when its hidden hunters appeared. The waters off Gansby had long been a magnet for those fascinated by the world's most feared predator, the great white shark. On August 20th, 2025, three friends from Berlin discovered, in the most harrowing way possible, that the thrill of being close to these creatures could turn in an instant into a fight for survival. Marcus Vogel, Daniel Kramer, and Jonas Richter had chartered a sleek yacht for an afternoon cruise, their plan a mix of leisure and excitement, a final shared adventure before returning to their separate lives back in Germany. The sun hung bright above the South African coast, the sea calm with a glassy sheen that seemed harmless. But beneath that surface moved the kind of power that few ever encountered directly and lived to describe. The yacht cut smoothly through the swells, its deck crew attending to the equipment while the three friends leaned against the stern, laughing, pointing out seabirds, and marveling at the sense of freedom that came with being far from shore. Gansby's reputation as a hotspot for great whites was something they all knew. Still, with the bulk of their trip intended as sightseeing rather than cage diving, the thought of danger seemed distant, as though the predators existed more as symbols than as immediate threats. That illusion was shattered without warning when the ocean itself seemed to erupt in violence. From beneath the calm surface, a massive 20-foot great white surged upward and rammed the yacht's hull with terrifying force. The stern ladder splintered on impact, chunks of metal torn loose as the vessel rocked violently to one side, the shock of the strike enough to throw all three men off balance and hurl them into the sea. One moment, they were secure on deck. The next, they were plunging into cold water, disoriented and panicked, as the vast shadow of the shark wheeled back toward them. The predator struck again almost immediately, its body whipping forward with a burst of speed that displaced the water in a surge of spray, its jaws closing around Marcus's leg in a crushing bite that pierced through muscle and bone with ease. The pain was immediate and blinding, his scream muffled by seawater as blood poured into the waves around him, a crimson cloud that spread quickly through the blue. The shark shook once, wrenching him sideways with a violent twist before releasing. its teeth leaving deep arcs of destruction that rendered his leg barely functional. Daniel, just feet away, saw the predator wheel past him, and in a desperate act of defiance, he kicked furiously at its flank, striking out in raw panic as he tried to drive the animal back. The shark snapped at the motion, its jaws grazing across his thigh in a glancing strike that opened long, bloody gashes without locking down. The force of that single brush sent him spinning backward in the water, pain radiating through his body as he struggled to regain orientation. Jonas surfaced nearby, his arm torn and bleeding after the shark brushed past him with jaws half open, the teeth carving deep gashes as though even incidental contact could maim. The sight of his own blood mingling with that of his friends nearly froze him in shock, his survival instinct overwhelmed by the sheer speed and brutality of the predator that now circled them. On deck, the crew reacted instantly, the chaos of shouting and movement filling the air as they hurled ropes over the side and struck the water with poles in a desperate effort to distract the shark and give the men a chance to escape. The predator circled back, drawn again by the scent of blood, its dorsal fin cutting a stark line through the waves as it turned with relentless precision toward the thrashing survivors. Every second stretched with unbearable tension as Marcus flailed in agony. Daniel kicked wildly to stay afloat, and Jonas fought to keep his injured arm above the surface, the three of them locked in the knowledge that one more strike could be final. The crew hammered poles against the water, the reverberations carrying through the sea, and with sudden unpredictability the shark veered off, turning away in a wide arc as though momentarily deterred by the sudden disturbance. Its massive shape slipped beneath the waves, vanishing from sight in the same abrupt way it had appeared, leaving only the wide stain of blood and the panicked gasps of the survivors to mark the violence that had just unfolded. The ropes became lifelines hauled taut as the crew dragged the battered men one by one back toward the safety of the yacht. Marcus's leg hung limp, blood pumping steadily from the mangled flesh as his pale face betrayed shock and near collapse. Daniel's thigh gushed blood in long ribbons as he fought to climb the ladder, every movement strained by pain, while Jonas clung with his uninjured arm, his strength nearly gone as he was pulled across the stern and collapsed against the deck. They lay together on the boards, shivering and gasping, their bodies torn and their minds numbed by the realization that the attack had lasted only minutes, yet had nearly ended all three of their lives. The deck beneath them became smeared with blood as the crew worked frantically to stem the flow from their wounds, the men clutching at each other not just for physical support, but for the shared recognition of how narrowly they had escaped being dragged beneath the surface for good. The sea around the yacht remained deceptively calm once the predator was gone, its surface rolling gently as though nothing had happened. Still, for those aboard, the illusion of safety had been shattered forever. The 20-foot shark had revealed the fragile line between leisure and terror, between a routine day on the water and the sudden arrival of death in the form of a predator that had ruled those seas for millions of years. For Marcus, Daniel, and Jonas, the memory would be carried in scars both physical and emotional, reminders etched into their bodies and minds of the moment when a calm afternoon turned into a desperate fight for survival. Their return to the yacht had not been a triumph but a reprieve, a narrow margin of luck and quick action that separated them from becoming the next names lost to the sea off Gansby, where great whites patrolled in numbers and size that few could fully comprehend. The summer waters off San Diego carried the usual energy of crowds eager for the thrill of speed and spray, the shoreline buzzing with jet skis carving across the surface in streaks of white wake. On the bright afternoon of July 30th, 2025, the ocean seemed like a playground for the dozens of riders gathered near the outer swells, their engines growling in bursts as they wove in and out of one another's paths. Among them was 25-year-old Brandon Keller, a rider who relished the sense of freedom that came from leaning into the curves and skimming across the blue surface at high speed, trusting his balance and reflexes against the unpredictable movements of the sea. The waves built unevenly with the shifting tide, and in the chaos of tight turns and sharp acceleration, Brandon lost control on a sudden jolt of swell that sent his craft pitching sideways. He flew forward, slamming into the water with a heavy smack that knocked the wind from his lungs and left him stunned in the seconds that followed. The impact spread ripples across the surface, a commotion that echoed far deeper than he could imagine. sending vibrations that carried into the territory of a predator built to sense exactly that kind of disturbance. Beneath the sunlit surface, a short-fin mako shark, one of the ocean's fastest and most aggressive hunters, surged toward the noise with astonishing speed. Its body cut through the water like a torpedo, its streamlined shape and powerful tail capable of reaching bursts near 40 miles per hour. As it ascended from the depths, the flash of its silver-blue flanks shimmered briefly before it drove upward in a strike that blurred the line between instinct and violence. The attack came with no warning. Brandon, still reeling from the fall, felt the surge below him a fraction of a second, before the shark's jaws clamped into his shoulder and arm with brutal force. The pressure was crushing, the teeth sawing into muscle and bone as the predator thrashed with violent bursts of speed, pulling him sideways in a spiral of foam and blood. The water filled with his scream as he flailed against the sheer power of an animal that could accelerate faster than any other shark in the ocean, its movements sharp and explosive, designed to overwhelm prey before escape was even possible. Nearby riders saw the water erupt. Their initial confusion quickly turned to horror as they recognized the sleek shape beneath the surface, the mako's dorsal fin slicing upward before vanishing again in a violent roll. Brandon's friends raced toward him, throttling their jet skis hard, their only weapon the paddles and equipment strapped to their machines. They beat against the surface in desperation, trying to distract the predator, their movements frantic as Brandon struggled in the blood-stained water. The shark released for a moment only to dart back in with another strike, snapping again at his arm with lightning speed before circling away, its quick, whip-like motions unlike the slow, deliberate movements of larger sharks. The rescue unfolded with the urgency of sheer survival. Brandon thrashed weakly, his strength fading as the water around him darkened with spreading blood. His shoulder ripped open, and his arm shredded by the shark's initial bite. His friends leaned down from their jet skis, gripping his vest and dragging him upward with all the strength they could summon, the machines bucking under the strain as waves pitched them dangerously close to capsizing. Every second carried the fear that the mako would surge back from below, striking again with the kind of velocity that few humans had ever seen up close. Witnesses shouted from nearby as the predator circled, its fin cutting a tight arc before it broke the surface in an explosive leap, its full length clearing the water in a sudden, breathtaking display of power. The shark's body hung in the air for a fraction of a second, sunlight glinting off its metallic skin, before it crashed back down with a spray of foam. The sight burned into the memory of everyone present, for there were few things more terrifying than seeing a predator of that speed and ferocity launch itself completely free of the sea, its raw athleticism on display even in the midst of an attack. The friends managed to haul Brandon onto one of the jet skis, his blood slicking across the seat as they wrapped their arms around him to hold him steady. His face was pale, his breath ragged, every movement filled with shock and agony as the predator continued to circle, refusing to abandon its interest in the chaos that still churned above. Another leap sent its body arcing clear of the water a second time, a final display before it vanished into the depths with the same speed it had arrived, leaving behind only the churned swells and the spreading evidence of what it had done. The ride back toward shore became a desperate dash, the jet ski engines roaring as Brandon's companions held him tight, his injuries bleeding heavily despite makeshift attempts to compress the wounds. Every second mattered. The realization was clear to them all, that the difference between survival and death now hinged on whether they could deliver him to help before blood loss overtook him. The crowd on the beach saw the frantic return and rushed to meet them, the scene of panic carrying forward as emergency responders fought to stabilize him against the kind of trauma that only the fastest shark in the sea could inflict. Doctors later described the damage as extensive but survivable, with the teeth marks and shredded muscle consistent with the attack of a short-fin mako, a predator known for its ability to reach speeds that could rival those of a speeding boat and its tendency to strike with sudden explosive bursts. For Brandon, the reality of what he had endured settled in slowly, the memory of the attack replaying in fragments of thrashing motion, the crushing force of jaws, and the shocking sight of the shark's body soaring above the surface. For locals, the event became more than just another story of a shark encounter, for it had unfolded in full view of dozens of witnesses. This spectacle transformed a day of high-speed sport into a reminder that the ocean was never truly tamed. The night was heavy with humidity on April 6, 2023, and the coastal inlets near the Panama Canal carried only the soft splash of Raul Mendoza's skiff as it drifted along the shallow, brackish channels, a place where he had fished countless times before, confident in his skill and comfort on the water. The faint glow of lanterns and the steady rhythm of water lapping against the hull created an atmosphere of routine. Still, in those same dark waters, a predator was moving unseen, drawn by the splashes and the faint scent of baitfish that Raul had been checking, a shadow cutting silently beneath the surface. At the same time, the fisherman went about his work unaware of the danger that was closing in. Raul leaned over to check a line when the water seemed to explode beneath him, a sudden eruption of force that sent a shock through his body before pain ignited in his leg. The jaws of a massive bull shark clamping onto his calf in a brutal grip that crushed down with terrifying strength. In an instant, he was yanked over the side, the lantern light flashing briefly across the white of the shark's underbelly before darkness swallowed them both, pulling him beneath the surface into the murk and the sand-strewn bottom where the predator thrashed with him like a rag doll. His lungs screamed as salt water rushed into his mouth, and his hands clawed instinctively at the shark's rough skin, his grip slipping against the sandpaper hide that only cut deeper into his palms as the shark shook and dragged him further. In the chaos, Raul's instincts took over, and though his leg was locked in the crushing bite, he swung wildly with the boat hook that he had managed to hold onto as he was dragged under. Each strike was desperate, more for survival than precision, the heavy metal tips scraping and jabbing against the predator's flank, the vibrations carrying through the water. At the same time, the shark's body twisted with terrifying bursts of power. The grip on his leg felt unbreakable, the pull against his body so overwhelming that he feared at any moment he would be torn apart. Yet he fought on, thrashing and forcing his body to move despite the panic flooding his chest. Above, his friends had heard the eruption of water and the muffled cry that followed, and their panic erupted as they rushed to the shoreline, lanterns swinging wildly in their hands as they shouted his name into the night. The black water revealed nothing but violent ripples, the surface broken by flashes of movement that told them something massive was beneath. In desperation, they hurled their lanterns into the waves, the sudden bursts of flame and sizzling glass lighting up the shallows in brief yellow flickers that illuminated the turmoil below. The shark's massive shape passed through the glow, a dark form that dwarfed Raul as he struggled, and for the first time his friends understood the scale of what had him in its grip. The predator reacted to the sudden disruption, loosening its bite just enough that Raul tore himself free, blood streaming from deep lacerations that turned the water into a clouded haze of red and black as he forced himself upward. His chest burned, his body heavy, but survival pushed him through the water as he clawed toward the skiff, gasping as he broke the surface with a ragged cry. His hands scrambled across the wooden edge, slippery with blood, and he hauled himself up with strength born purely of fear, collapsing onto the deck with his leg twisted and mangled from the crushing force of the shark's jaws. The bull shark circled just beneath the surface, its dorsal fin slicing briefly through the lantern-lit ripples, its presence a reminder that the danger had not passed, that it could return at any moment to finish what it had started. His friends shouted again, waving their arms and throwing debris into the water, anything to keep the predator's focus away from the wounded man sprawled in his boat. The shark lingered for long seconds, shadowing the skiff in the shallow water before finally turning and disappearing into the darkness of the inlet, leaving only silence and the faint rocking of waves as its massive body slipped away unseen. On the deck, Raul lay gasping, every muscle trembling, his hands pressed tight against the shredded flesh of his calf where blood pulsed steadily between his fingers. His face was pale in the lantern light, his breathing ragged, yet his eyes were open, locked on the water as if he expected the predator to surge up again and drag him back beneath the surface. His friends scrambled aboard, their voices cracking with panic as they tried to stop the bleeding with torn pieces of cloth, the skiff rocking under their frantic movements as they pushed it back toward shore, their eyes never leaving the dark water that trailed beside them. When they reached land, medics rushed to stabilize him, the deep gashes revealing muscle and torn tendons, the wounds described later as consistent with the crushing power of a bull shark's jaws. Even as they treated him, Raul's body shook with shock, his mind replaying the moment of impact again and again, the way the water had opened beneath him and the jaws had clamped down without warning. The sheer speed of the attack, leaving him no chance to react until he was already being dragged under. He had fished those waters for years, trusted his knowledge of the tides and the channels. Yet none of it had prepared him for the raw force of the predator that claimed those inlets as its hunting ground. Experts who reviewed the incident later explained that bull sharks were among the most aggressive of shark species. Their ability to thrive in both salt and brackish water, making them particularly dangerous in areas where fishermen often worked close to shore. They described their attacks as sudden and territorial, usually triggered without warning by splashing or the faint scent of blood in the water. And Raoul's case was a chilling reminder of how quickly routine could turn to disaster when darkness masked a predator's approach. The ocean had seemed calm and inviting on May 21, 2025. The kind of turquoise water that made people forget how quickly danger could rise beneath the surface. For Laura Simmons, a 33-year-old mother from Florida, the chance to relax with her 7-year-old son Leo on a bright inflatable flamingo had felt harmless, even joyful, as they floated under the warmth of the Bahamian sun just a little way off the beaches of Bimini. The flamingo rocked gently in the swells, and Laura let herself drift, unaware that the current was carrying them farther out, pushing them slowly beyond the comfort of shallow water, beyond the safety of swimmers still close to shore, and into the domain of creatures few ever truly expected to encounter. Beneath the surface, a massive hammerhead shark patrolled the sandy bottom, its wide, flattened head sweeping from side to side as it searched for prey, following faint vibrations and the electric pulses of life that echoed through the water. The inflatable flamingo with its splashing riders became a beacon. This unusual shape stirred the shark's curiosity. As the distance between Laura and the beach grew, the predator began to close the gap with measured, powerful strokes of its tail, rising slowly from deeper water until its shadow merged with the bright shimmer near the surface. Laura only realized something was wrong when the flamingo jolted hard from below, the impact so sudden that she nearly lost her grip. Before she could process what had happened, the water beside her erupted in white spray as the hammerhead surged up, ramming the inflatable again and tearing at its plastic with wide, snapping jaws. She screamed and wrapped her arms around Leo, trying to shield him as the flamingo twisted violently, the sound of tearing plastic mixing with the slap of waves, and then she felt teeth rake across her forearm, a flash of pain that told her the shark had made contact. The flamingo deflated quickly, hissing as air escaped, and the next moment they were thrown into the sea, the water rushing cold around them, the inflatable spinning away half-collapsed. Laura clutched Leo tightly, forcing him onto her back as she kicked desperately, her free arm sweeping to keep him afloat, her injured arm bleeding into the sea. The hammerhead wheeled around immediately, its tall dorsal fin slicing the surface as it circled the splashing figures, drawn by the scent of blood and the erratic vibrations of prey and distress. Laura's heart pounded as she tried to keep her head above water, her legs kicking furiously. Her eyes locked on the dark shape-cutting arcs beneath them. Every second felt stretched thin, the vast ocean closing in around her, and she knew instinct told her to fight, to appear large, to strike if she had to, even as panic threatened to take over. She jabbed downward with her foot when the shark came close, her heel connecting with rough skin that felt like sandpaper. And though the hammerhead veered off briefly, it came back again, circling with relentless patience. Leo cried out in fear, his small hands gripping her shoulders, and Laura gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus, forcing herself to keep him above the waterline. She swung her good arm in the water, pushing him higher, trying to make herself a barrier between her child and the predator. The hammerhead's movements grew bolder, and soon its massive head broke the surface, its strange eyes set far apart as its jaws snapped just feet away, sending water splashing into their faces. Nearby snorkelers had heard the screams and seen the frantic splashing, and several of them swam toward the scene, shouting as they splashed their fins and waved their arms, throwing floating buoys they carried with them to distract the shark. The commotion made the hammerhead hesitate, its sweeping head turning side to side as if assessing the new noise. Still, each time Laura thought it might retreat, it curved back, its fin slicing closer, the water foaming as its massive body moved with frightening power. Laura kicked again and again, her legs burning with effort, her lungs aching as salt water stung her throat, and she fought to stay upright with Leo clinging to her back. The snorkelers kept shouting, slapping the surface to create confusion, and one hurled a buoy directly between the shark and the struggling mother and child, causing the predator to veer sharply to one side. The seconds dragged as the hammerhead circled again, but at last its movement slowed, its wide head sweeping as if it had lost interest. And then with a sudden surge it turned away, slipping back into the deeper water that had birthed it. Laura's arms shook with exhaustion as she clung to the floating buoy tossed their way, pulling Leo tight against her chest while she kicked toward the approaching snorkelers. Together they guided her toward the shore, supporting her bleeding arm and steadying the boy, who was trembling but alive. When they finally reached the shallows, Laura collapsed to her knees, the sand beneath her hands and the crash of waves around her feeling like the most solid ground she had ever known. Doctors later treated her for deep cuts and puncture wounds on her arm, and though the injuries were serious, she was alive, and Leo had escaped with only minor scrapes. For the locals who had watched from the beach and the tourists who had rushed into the water to help, the sight of the hammerhead circling the mother and child would never be forgotten. A reminder that even a playful afternoon on a bright inflatable could change without warning into a fight for survival against one of the ocean's most formidable hunters. The experts who examined the scene explained that hammerheads were powerful predators, often drawn to splashing and unusual shapes at the surface, and that drifting too far from shore on inflatables could put even cautious swimmers in sudden danger. For Laura and Leo, the experience would forever mark the boundary between innocence and the reality of the sea, a moment where survival had depended on instinct, courage, and the desperate will to protect what mattered most.